The studio lights blazed, the audience buzzing with anticipation. Trump leaned back in his chair, smirking like he owned the room. Denzel sat across from him, calm at first, but his eyes carried that sharp weight, the look of someone who wasn't here to play games. The host barely got through the introduction before Trump cut in, waving his hand dismissively. "Denzel, you're a great actor, no doubt. But stick to Hollywood. This is politics, this is real life," Trump said, his voice dripping with arrogance. The crowd laughed nervously, sensing trouble brewing. Denzel leaned forward slowly, his tone low but every word slicing like a blade. "You talk about real life, Donald? Real life is people losing jobs while you build towers. Real life is families struggling while you brag about ratings. Don't lecture me about reality, you wouldn't recognize it if it stood in front of you." The audience gasped. Trump's smirk faltered, and he tried to regain control, raising his voice. "You don't know what you're talking about. I created jobs, I made America strong. You're just an actor playing tough guy on camera." That's when Denzel exploded. His voice thundered through the studio. "You're a fraud, Donald. A fraud. You sold people promises you never intended to keep. You used their pain as your stage, and you call that leadership? No, that's performance, and a bad one at that." The studio erupted, cheers, shouts, gasps. Even the host froze, unsure whether to intervene. Denzel didn't flinch. He sat upright, eyes locked on Trump, his words hanging in the air like a verdict. Trump stood up, red-faced, pointing his finger. "You don't talk to me like that. Nobody calls me a fraud." But it was too late. The crowd had already chosen their side, roaring in approval at Denzel's blow. The studio wasn't just watching a debate anymore, it was watching history, a man stripping the mask off Trump in front of millions. Trump's voice boomed, his fingers still jabbing in the air like a weapon. "You think you're some kind of hero, Denzel? You sit there with your speeches and your Hollywood spotlight, but you don't know a damn thing about what it takes to run a country. I faced world leaders, I built deals, I made America respected again. While you..." Denzel cut him off, his calm turning into pure fire. "Respected? Donald, the world laughed at you. They didn't see strength, they saw chaos. They saw a man using power like a stage prop, throwing tantrums while people suffered. You weren't a leader, you were a performer desperate for applause." The audience clapped and shouted, some rising to their feet. Trump tried to shout over them. "Fake news. Lies. That's what you people live on. Without me, America would have been finished. Everyone knows it." Denzel shook his head, his voice steady but filled with a sharp edge. "No, Donald. What everyone knows is that you preyed on fear. You promised working people a future, then padded your own pockets. You built towers while factories closed. You built casinos while schools crumbled. And now you stand here and call yourself the savior? That's not leadership, that's theft disguised as patriotism." The crowd exploded again, some chanting, "Denzel! Denzel!" The host tried to regain control, but the energy was out of his hands. Trump leaned in close to Denzel, lowering his voice, trying to intimidate. "You don't scare me, Washington. You've got the crowd now, but I've got history on my side. People remember me." Denzel didn't blink. He leaned forward, locking eyes with Trump. "Oh, they'll remember you, Donald. They'll remember the lies, the corruption, the chaos. And tonight, they'll remember that someone finally called you out for what you really are." The words hit like a hammer. The studio roared so loud the cameras shook. Trump's face tightened, fists clenching, his trademark smirk gone. Trump slammed his hand on the table so hard the microphones rattled. "Enough of your lectures. You're just an actor. You read lines someone else writes. You don't build, you don't lead, you don't bleed for this country. I was in the arena, I took the hits, I carried America on my shoulders while people like you sat in their mansions counting money." Denzel didn't flinch. He sat back in his chair, eyes locked on Trump, then spoke with a controlled fury that cut sharper than shouting ever could. You carried America? Donald, you carried your brand. Every headline, every deal, every press conference, it was all about you. America wasn't on your shoulders, it was under your boots. The studio gasped, some even laughing nervously at the sting of his words. Trump turned crimson, his fists pounding the air. I gave jobs, I lowered taxes, I made people proud to be American again. Ask anyone outside this bubble. Denzel leaned forward now, his voice rising with the energy of the room. Ask the families who lost their homes. Ask the workers laid off while your companies filed bankruptcy, again and again, while you walked away richer every time. Ask the soldiers you mocked, the women you belittled, the allies you betrayed. That's your record, Donald. You didn't lift America, you sold it. The crowd erupted into chants, some shouting, "Truth," while others booed Trump's every attempt to interrupt. The host was gripping his cards tight, sweat dripping down his forehead, knowing he was witnessing a storm that couldn't be stopped. Trump jabbed a finger at Denzel, spitting his words. You don't talk to me like that. Nobody talks to me like that. I was President of the United States, and you. Denzel slammed the table right back, his voice booming over Trump's. And you disgraced it. That office was bigger than you, Donald, but you shrank it to fit your ego. History won't remember your title, it'll remember your failures. And tonight, in front of this nation, I'm making sure of it. The audience went wild, some standing on chairs, others chanting Denzel's name like he was delivering a closing argument in court. Trump's mouth opened, but for once, no words came out. Trump's voice cracked into a full-on roar. You're a fraud, Denzel. You sit there acting like some saint, but you've spent your life pretending. That's all you are, pretend. You don't know what it's like to lead, to fight, to win. You're Hollywood trash. The insult landed heavy in the air, but Denzel didn't blink. He stayed seated, his posture steady, his hands clasped together like a man who had heard it all before. Then he leaned into the mic, his voice low but sharp as a blade. You just proved my point. When you're cornered, you don't use facts, you use insults. When you can't defend your record, you attack character. But here's the difference, my work may be acting, but yours was supposed to be leadership. And Donald, no one believes in your performance anymore. The audience exploded. The cheers drowned out Trump's attempt to fire back. He waved his arms, shouting into the noise, "Fake news. Lies. He's lying." But the crowd wasn't listening. Denzel pressed on, his voice steady, commanding, every syllable landing like a hammer. You talk about leading, but you led with fear. You talk about fighting, but you fought the weakest. You talk about winning, but you left millions losing. That's not leadership, it's manipulation. Trump turned, jabbing at the audience now. They put you up to this. This is all scripted. You're nothing but a puppet. Denzel shook his head slowly, his gaze unflinching. No, Donald. These words aren't scripted. They're lived. They're spoken by someone who's seen the damage your pride has done. This isn't Hollywood. This is real. And that's why it hurts you so much, because the truth doesn't cut like a joke. It cuts like a scar. The studio went silent for a beat, the weight of the words hanging heavy. Then the eruption came, cheers, clapping, even people standing up, chanting Denzel's name. Trump's face was pure fury, his finger trembling as he pointed at Denzel, but for the first time that night, his voice faltered. Trump shot up from his chair, face flushed, chest puffed out. He slammed his hand on the desk, the mic rattling. I built this country back up. I took on China, I fought for jobs, I put America first. People know I'm a fighter, stronger than Hollywood speeches, stronger than weak men who hide behind words. You just clap when the director says clap. The room froze for a beat, cameras catching every vein bulging on Trump's neck. Then Denzel leaned back, calm but razor sharp. America first? His voice cut like glass. You put yourself first. Always. You fought for jobs, your deals. You talked tough on China, but you bowed to money. And you want to call me an actor? At least I never lied to a nation just to get applause. Gasps and shouts erupted from the crowd. Trump lunged toward the mic, voice cracking. Wrong. Wrong. They loved me. They loved what I did. You're jealous, Denzel, jealous of my success. Denzel leaned forward now, eyes locked on him like a spotlight. Jealous? Of what? The chaos? The lies? The broken families? The hate you fed like gasoline on a fire? If that's what you call success, then tonight you just confessed your failure. A man in the audience shot to his feet, fist in the air. Tell him, Denzel. The studio erupted, cheers, boos, clapping, all at once. Trump spun toward the crowd, desperate for validation, but all he found was noise and chaos. Denzel didn't even need to stand. His voice alone owned the room. See, Donald, he said slowly, each word deliberate, you can't script the truth. You can't brand it. You can't spin it. Tonight, you're not the fighter. Tonight, you're just exposed. The crowd exploded. Trump froze, eyes darting, the look of a man finally cornered. Trump's face turned crimson, his jaw tightening as he pointed a finger straight at Denzel. You think you're some kind of hero? You read lines for a living. You pretend for cameras. I lived it. I was in the arena, I took the punches. You wouldn't last one day under the pressure I faced. One day. The crowd booed and hissed, some clapping, others jeering. But Denzel didn't flinch. He let Trump's words hang in the air, like smoke choking the room, then leaned in with that slow, deliberate power that made every syllable sting. You talk about the arena, Donald, but let's tell the truth, you weren't taking punches, you were throwing cheap shots. You weren't fighting for the people, you were fighting for yourself. Every time you were cornered, you pointed fingers. Every time the truth knocked on your door, you slammed it shut and blamed somebody else. Trump pounded the desk, his voice cracking under the weight of his own fury. That's a lie. A total lie. I gave them hope, I gave them jobs, I gave them a future. You don't understand leadership, you wouldn't understand power if it hit you in the face. The audience roared, split down the middle, half shouting, Trump. Trump, while the other half clapped furiously for Denzel. The tension felt like the air before a storm, heavy and electric. Denzel's eyes narrowed, his voice lowering, forcing the room to lean in. You gave them a show, Donald. Smoke and mirrors. You branded pain and called it patriotism. You sold division like it was the American dream. And tonight, he pointed toward Trump, calm but merciless, you're proving it again. Because every time someone challenges you, you don't answer. You explode. You hide behind volume. That's not strength, that's fear. A gasp rippled through the studio. Trump froze for a second, caught in the silence Denzel had carved out of the chaos. And in that pause, the crowd knew, the man who always shouted louder had finally met a voice that cut deeper. Trump leaned forward, his voice dripping with venom. Let me tell you something, Denzel. You stand up here, acting like you're the voice of the people, but you've been living in Hollywood mansions your whole life. You don't know struggle, you don't know sacrifice. You're just another millionaire actor who thinks lecturing America makes him relevant. You're fake. You're nothing but a fraud. The words hit the studio like a punch. Gasps. A few Trump supporters cheered wildly, pounding on their chairs, chanting, fraud. Fraud. The camera zoomed in on Denzel, calm, still, his hands folded in front of him like a man sharpening his blade before striking. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but sharp enough to slice through the noise. You want to talk about struggle, Donald? I buried friends before I turned 20. I watched families ripped apart, communities starved, and I carried those stories with me long before Hollywood ever knew my name. Don't confuse the spotlight with my soul. The crowd hushed, tension winding tighter with every word. You call me a fraud? Denzel continued, rising slightly in his chair. Fraud is building towers with other people's money and leaving workers unpaid. Fraud is telling people you're their savior while you sell them lies wrapped in flags. Fraud is pretending you care about America when you've only ever cared about yourself. The audience erupted. Half the room roared in applause, the other half booed ferociously. The studio lights seemed to buzz louder, the air vibrating with rage and electricity. Trump, now red-faced, waved his hands furiously. Wrong. All lies. You're twisting everything. But Denzel didn't let him breathe. You don't get to redefine struggle. You don't get to erase truth. And you sure as hell don't get to call me fake when the mask you've worn for decades is cracking right in front of us. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was loaded, explosive, the kind that told everyone in that room they just witnessed a line being crossed that couldn't be walked back. Trump slammed his hand on the table so hard the microphones rattled. Enough. You think you can sit here and lecture me? I built an empire. I was president of the United States. And you? You're just an actor playing tough on television. Nobody elected you. Nobody cares about your speeches. His voice rose into a near shout, the veins in his neck bulging. He jabbed a finger toward Denzel, pacing now, desperate to claw back control of the room. You don't know politics. You don't know business. You're nothing without Hollywood propping you up. You're weak, Denzel. Weak. The studio was chaos, boos clashing with cheers, chants drowning in jeers. The moderator tried to cut in, but the storm had already taken over. Cameras zoomed between Trump's red, furious face and Denzel's stillness, the contrast almost cinematic. And then, without raising his voice, Denzel cut through the noise with a single line that froze the room. Real strength isn't measured by the size of your buildings or the office you once held, it's measured by the truth you're willing to stand on when the whole world is watching. The audience erupted, not in chaos this time, but in a thunderous standing ovation. People shot out of their seats, clapping, shouting his name. Some even had tears in their eyes. The chants of fraud had been drowned out, replaced by Denzel. Denzel, echoing like a war drum. Trump stood frozen, his mouth open, his words gone. For the first time all night, he had nothing to throw back. The cameras caught every detail, the fury in his eyes, the silence in his throat, and the undeniable power of the moment. Denzel leaned back in his chair, calm again, almost whispering as the applause thundered. And that's why you'll never break me, Donald. Because truth doesn't need power, it is power. Trump slammed his palm against the table with such force that the microphones jolted, the boom echoing through the studio. His face was flushed, his jaw locked tight, and his fingers shot across the stage like a weapon aimed directly at Denzel. Enough, he barked, his voice cracking with fury. You think you can sit here and lecture me like some preacher with a Hollywood script? I built towers that scraped the sky. I sat in the Oval Office, the most powerful man in the world. And you? You're just an actor pretending to be tough on TV. Nobody elected you. Nobody cares about your speeches. You don't run anything but your mouth. He paced like a caged lion, the heat rolling off him. You don't know politics, you don't know business, and you sure as hell don't know me. Without Hollywood propping you up, you're nothing, Denzel. Nothing. Weak. The studio split into chaos. Half the crowd roared in defense of Trump, fists pumping, while the other half booed and shouted his name in protest. The moderator threw up his hands, helpless, drowned out by the storm of voices clashing in the air. Cameras cut from Trump's storming presence to Denzel's stillness. He hadn't flinched. His body leaned slightly forward, calm, waiting. And then, when the noise reached its breaking point, Denzel spoke, not loud, not rushed, but steady, his words slicing through the bedlam like a blade. Real strength isn't measured by the size of your buildings or the title you once held. Real strength is measured by the truth you're willing to stand on when the entire world is watching. The line hit the room like a shockwave. Silence fell for a fraction of a second, as if the air had been sucked out. Then the audience erupted, not in divided chaos this time, but in a unified, deafening ovation. People leapt to their feet, clapping, stomping, chanting his name. Some shouted, "Truth," over and over, while others simply roared with the release of something raw they'd been waiting to hear. Trump stood frozen, his finger still extended, his mouth open but empty. For the first time all night, he had no comeback. Cameras captured everything, the flush of his cheeks, the rage in his eyes, and the stunned silence that swallowed him whole. Denzel leaned back in his chair, letting the cheers wash over him. He didn't need to shout, his whisper carried farther than Trump's roar. "And that's why you'll never break me, Donald," he said, his eyes locked on Trump. "Because truth doesn't need power, it is power." The audience answered with another explosion of applause, this time so thunderous the studio floor shook beneath their feet. The moment the cameras cut, the internet ignited like a wildfire. Clips of Denzel staring Trump down with that calm, unshakable gaze flooded Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube within minutes. One 15-second clip, Denzel saying, "Truth doesn't need power, it is power," was looped millions of times before the hour was over. On Instagram, celebrities reposted the moment with captions like, "Legend." Hashtags exploded, hashtag Denzel vs. Trump, hashtag Truth is Power, hashtag Studio Meltdown. Memes spread at lightning speed, Trump's pointed finger photoshopped into cartoons, Denzel's still pose turned into iconic black and white posters with the word truth stamped in bold letters. News outlets scrambled to catch up. CNN ran the headline, "Washington drops the mic, Trump silenced on live TV." Fox News shot back with, "Hollywood versus politics, Trump fights back." But the clips themselves spoke louder than any headline. Everywhere you looked, bars, airports, living rooms, the confrontation played on TV screens with subtitles burned in. Trump's team rushed to do damage control. His spokesperson blasted out a furious statement calling Denzel a Hollywood elitist exploiting politics for attention. But the internet wasn't buying it. A top comment under the statement read, "Denzel didn't need politics, politics needed Denzel tonight." It racked up 100,000 likes in under 10 minutes. Meanwhile, Denzel trended across every platform. People began calling him the People's President, memes depicting him at the Resolute desk with captions like, "This is who should have been running things." Late-night shows scrapped their scripts and opened with montages of the clash. One host quipped, "Trump built towers, but Denzel just built an empire with one sentence." The audience howled. Even foreign news picked it up. BBC described it as a cultural earthquake in American politics. Al Jazeera called it the moment a Hollywood icon spoke with more authority than a former president. By sunrise, the clip had shattered records. It was the most watched political confrontation in internet history. The studio confrontation had jumped from entertainment into the bloodstream of global politics. And while Trump's silence became the punchline of 1,000 jokes, Denzel's words became something more, a rallying cry. Across campuses, city streets, and workplaces, people were repeating it like scripture. Truth doesn't need power, it is power. By the next day, the clash wasn't just trending, it had cemented itself as the cultural event of the year. Entire talk shows ditched their planned topics to run split screens of Trump's fiery outbursts against Denzel's poised silence. One headline captured the mood perfectly. "When power met truth, and lost." Universities held impromptu debates, professors replaying the footage to packed lecture halls. In high schools, students repeated Denzel's words like they were lines from a revolutionary speech. Street artists spray-painted his quote, "Truth doesn't need power, it is power," across city walls from Los Angeles to New York. Overnight, it had transformed into a protest chant, a hashtag, a slogan on t-shirts and posters. Trump, unwilling to let the silence define him, stormed back onto the stage of social media. His rants grew sharper, calling Denzel a fraud, a scripted actor, and even threatening lawsuits. But every angry post only fueled the fire, because the internet had already picked its winner. Comments mocked him, "You built towers, but Denzel built futures." Memes flooded timelines, Trump red-faced and shouting while Denzel sat calmly, captioned with, "Checkmate." Late-night comedians turned it into comedy gold, but activists turned it into something more, a rallying cry. Rallies in major cities carried signs reading, "Truth is power." For the first time in years, politics and Hollywood weren't just colliding, they were merging, sparking a movement neither side had planned for. International leaders even weighed in. A French minister tweeted, "Sometimes the strongest voice comes from outside the political arena." Meanwhile, China's state media called it a sign of America's fractured leadership. Whether praised or mocked, one fact was undeniable: the clash had gone global. And Denzel? He stayed quiet. No follow-up interviews, no press conferences. Just silence. That silence was louder than any Trump rant. Because the more he said nothing, the more people filled in the blanks with meaning, elevating him from actor to symbol. By week's end, polls showed a stunning statistic: more than half of Americans said Denzel's words carried more weight than anything Trump had said since leaving office. The confrontation was no longer just a viral clip. It was a cultural fault line. It didn't matter if you loved Trump or hated him, or whether you adored Hollywood or distrusted it, everyone had seen it, and no one could unsee it. For some, it was the night Trump finally lost his grip. For others, it was the night Denzel became something more than a legend. For history, it would be remembered as the night truth walked into a studio, stood its ground, and changed everything.